I was elbow deep in a busted garbage disposal when Sophie Bennett knocked on my door wearing a dress that cost more than my truck, and I want you to understand right away that nothing about that sentence made any sense to me at the time. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 33, I run a one-man handyman business out of a beat-up van with my name stenciled crooked on the side because I painted it myself after 2 beers, and I had fixed exactly one thing for Sophie Bennett before that night. A leaking pipe under her kitchen sink, back in the spring, a job that took 40 minutes and earned me a check and a polite thank you and nothing else. I did not expect to see her again. Rich clients rarely called back unless something else broke, and even then they usually called the bigger outfit with the trucks that matched. So when my doorbell rang on a Thursday night in October and I opened it holding a wrench I had not bothered to put down, and found her standing there in green silk with her hair pinned up and panic written all over her face, I just stood there blinking at her like she'd knocked on the wrong house. "Ethan," she said. "Please tell me you own a suit." I looked down at my grease-stained t-shirt, then back up at her. "I own a funeral suit." "Why?" "Because I need you to wear it in the next 40 minutes. She said it fast, the way people talk when they've been rehearsing the sentence the whole drive over and it still comes out sideways. "I need a date. Tonight. A real one, dressed and ready, standing next to me in front of about 300 people who all know my family." I set the wrench down on the little table by the door because it felt wrong to keep holding it during whatever this was. "Sophie, I fixed your sink." "I know. I don't know anything about your family, or 300 people, or whatever tonight is. That's exactly why I'm asking you." She said that like it was obvious, like it should have settled the whole thing right there. When I didn't answer, she kept going, faster now, the words falling over each other. "My father is hosting the annual gala for Bennett Holdings tonight. Half his board will be there. My ex-fiancé will be there, with his new fiancé, which he apparently thinks is a normal thing to do. And my mother has spent the last 2 weeks telling every single person she knows that I am, quote, still figuring things out, which is her way of announcing to a room full of investors that her daughter is a mess. That's a lot of information in one breath. I've had a lot of breaths to prepare it." She glanced past me into my house, at the mail on the counter and the boots by the door, like she was searching for a reason to keep standing there instead of turning around. "I don't have anyone else to ask. Every man I know from that world would either say yes for the wrong reasons or use it to get something out of my father. I need someone who has absolutely nothing to gain from being there. You fixed my sink and left. You didn't even take a business card off my counter when I offered it. That's the most honest thing anyone's done for me all year." I stood in my doorway for a second, weighing that against the smell of dinner going cold on my stove behind me. "You're serious?" I have never been more serious about anything humiliating in my life. That got a laugh out of me before I could stop it, and something in her shoulders eased when it did, like she'd been bracing for me to say no and hadn't planned past that. I looked at her a long moment. Green dress, careful makeup, and underneath all of it, a woman who looked like she'd rather be doing almost anything else. That part, more than the dress, was what made me step back and hold the door open. "Give me 20 minutes, I said. The suit's going to smell like a closet. I don't care what it smells like." She almost smiled. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I don't know which fork to use. Just follow my lead and don't mention the sink." 25 minutes later, I was standing in a suit I hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding 2 years back, sitting in the passenger seat of Sophie's car because she said driving would give her something to do with her hands besides shake, and neither of us said much until we pulled up outside a hotel with a valet line stretching down the block. "Last chance to back out," she said, hands still on the wheel. "You're the one who has to walk in there. I just have to stand next to you and not say anything stupid. That's not comforting." I didn't say I'd manage it. I said I'd try. She laughed, quick and real, and for a second the panic in her face dropped away completely. "Okay. House rules. My father is Richard Bennett. He built this company from a single warehouse 40 years ago and he will ask you what you do for a living within the first 90 seconds of meeting you. Tell him the truth. He respects the truth more than he respects money, which most people around him have forgotten." "And your ex?" Her jaw tightened. "Preston. If he talks to you, be polite and don't take the bait. He's very good at making people look foolish in front of a crowd. It's practically his whole personality." "Noted." And my mother will ask you 100 questions in the first 5 minutes, most of them about your family, your income, and your intentions. Answer honestly and she'll either love you or write you off completely, and either one is fine with me tonight. You've thought about this a lot. I've thought about very little else since I called you. We got out. She took my arm at the base of the steps like it was the most natural thing in the world, and I felt the weight of her hand settle there and told myself it meant nothing, that this was a job like any other job, a favor like fixing a pipe, except pipes didn't look at you the way Sophie looked at me right before we walked through those doors. Scared, and grateful, and something else underneath that I didn't have a name for yet. The ballroom was the kind of room I had only ever seen in movies. Chandeliers, a string quartet in the corner playing something slow, waiters moving through the crowd with trays of drinks nobody seemed to actually want. I felt every stitch of my funeral suit and every callus on my hands the second we stepped inside, and I think Sophie felt me tense because she squeezed my arm once, quick, like a signal. You look like you're about to disarm a bomb, she murmured. That's about how I feel. Just breathe. And smile like you're having a good time even if you're dying inside. Everyone else in this room is doing exactly that. We hadn't made it 20 feet before a man appeared in our path like he'd been watching the door the whole night, which, I would learn later, he had. Tall, tailored, the kind of tan that comes from somewhere expensive. Preston Ward looked at Sophie first, then at me, and I watched his whole expression rearrange itself into something amused. Sophie. He said her name like it belonged to him still. You brought a date. I did. Her voice was steady. Steadier than I expected. Preston, this is Ethan. Preston's eyes moved over me slow, cataloging the suit, the hands, the way I stood like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. And what is it you do, Ethan? I fix things, I said. Houses, mostly. Whatever's broken. Something flickered across his face, satisfaction, like I'd handed him exactly the ammunition he wanted. How practical. It pays the bills. I'm sure it does. He looked back at Sophie. This is a bold choice for tonight, of all nights. It's the only choice I wanted to make, she said, and there was an edge in it now, something I hadn't heard in the car. Enjoy the party, Preston. She pulled me along before he could answer, and I felt the tension in her arm the whole way across the room. When we were far enough away, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since we walked in. You okay? I asked. I will be. She glanced at me sideways. You didn't take the bait. You told me not to. Most men don't listen the first time. I'm not most men. I'm the guy who fixed your sink. That earned another laugh, and this one lasted longer, and I decided right then that making Sophie Bennett laugh in a room full of people who scared her was worth every uncomfortable minute of the night so far. We found her father near the head table, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of handshake that told you everything about a person in one motion. Richard Bennett looked at his daughter first, warm, easy, the way a father looks at a daughter he's proud of even when he's worried about her. Then his eyes moved to me, and I felt them do the same slow assessment Preston's had, except without the smugness. Just curiosity. Dad, this is Ethan Cole. Mr. Bennett. I put my hand out and he took it, firm. Ethan. He said my name like he was testing the shape of it. How do you know my daughter? He's a friend, Sophie said quickly. I fixed her sink, I said at the same time. Richard's eyebrows went up. He looked between us, and something in his face shifted, less guarded than it had been a second ago. You fixed her sink? Yes, sir. Back in the spring. And now you're her date to my company gala. That's about the shape of it, yes. He laughed, a real laugh, deep and sudden, and a few heads turned nearby at the sound of it. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me all night, and I've been standing here for 2 hours. He looked at me a beat longer than felt comfortable. What do you do for a living, Ethan? I run a handyman business. Small operation. Just me in a van. You own it. Every wrench in it. How long? 6 years. Started after I got laid off from a construction outfit that folded. Figured I'd rather work for myself and eat cheap than work for somebody who could cut me loose with a phone call. Richard nodded slowly, like that answer mattered more than it should have. Smart man. He glanced at Sophie, and something passed between them, something I didn't understand yet. Stay close tonight. I want to talk to you again before this thing ends. Yes, sir. When he moved off to greet another cluster of guests, Sophie let out a breath. That went well. Did it? Felt like a job interview. She looked at me strange then, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected. With my father, that's the same thing as him liking you. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was a polite thing rich men said to fill silence, the kind of comment that evaporates by morning. I had no idea that comment was about to rearrange my entire life. The rest of the night went easier than I expected. Sophie's mother cornered us near the dessert table and asked exactly the questions Sophie had predicted, and I answered them straight, and something about my flat honesty seemed to disarm her the same way it had disarmed Richard. We danced once, badly on my part, and Sophie laughed into my shoulder the whole time and told me I danced like a man defusing a bomb, which felt like it was becoming the theme of the evening. Preston watched us from across the room more than once, and every time I caught him doing it, Sophie's hand found mine like she was reminding both of us why we were there. Near the end of the night, when the crowd had thinned and the band had slowed down to something quiet, Sophie pulled me toward the balcony doors, out into the cool air above the city lights. "Thank you," she said, leaning on the railing. "For real this time. Not the panicked doorstep version. You already thanked me. I meant it more this time." I leaned beside her. "Can I ask you something? After tonight, I think you've earned one question." "Why me?" "You could have asked anybody. Somebody from your world who'd know which fork to use without being told." She was quiet a second, looking out over the lights instead of at me. "Because everyone in my world wants something from being seen with me. A connection, an introduction, a foothold with my father. You didn't want anything. You just fixed my sink and left." She glanced at me. "I needed one night where the person standing next to me wasn't calculating an angle. I wasn't calculating anything. I was mostly worried about spilling wine on this suit." That got a real laugh out of her, the kind that came from somewhere honest. That's exactly why it worked. We stood there a while longer, not saying much, the noise of the party fading behind the glass doors, and I remember thinking that whatever this was, it had already stopped feeling like a favor. Richard Bennett called me 4 days later. I almost didn't answer, because I didn't recognize the number and I was up to my elbows replacing a water heater in a duplex 2 towns over, but something made me wipe my hands and pick up anyway. "Ethan." "Richard Bennett." I straightened up so fast I nearly knocked the water heater over. "Mr. Bennett. What can I do for you? I have a question for you, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer, not just say whatever you think I want to hear." "All right." Bennett Holdings owns 11 residential properties across the city, apartment buildings, mostly older stock, that need consistent maintenance. Right now we contract that work out to 3 different companies, and frankly, all 3 of them overcharge us and underdeliver. I watched you talk about your business Saturday night, and I watched you handle yourself in a room that would have eaten most men alive. I want to offer you a position managing facilities and maintenance for those 11 properties. Full-time, salaried, benefits, a real budget to hire a crew under you instead of running solo out of a van. I stood there in a stranger's basement holding a phone against my ear, completely still. "Mr. Bennett, I don't know what to say." Say yes, or say you need time to think about it. Don't say anything in between designed to flatter me. I've had a lifetime of that and I'm tired of it. I need time to think about it. "Good answer." I could hear the smile in his voice. "Come by my office Thursday. We'll talk numbers." He hung up before I could say anything else, and I stood there in the basement for a solid minute just staring at the water heater like it might explain what had just happened. I called Sophie that night, mostly because I didn't know who else to tell, and mostly because some part of me wanted to hear what she thought before I let myself get excited about it. "He offered me a job," I said, the second she picked up. There was a pause on the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "He did what?" "Facilities manager. 11 properties. Full crew, real budget." I paced my kitchen while I said it, like saying it out loud too fast would make it stop being true. "I don't know if I should take it." "Why wouldn't you take it?" "Because I don't want your father thinking he owes me something because I stood next to you for one night in a suit that smelled like mothballs." I don't want this to be charity. Sophie was quiet a second. Ethan, my father does not hand out jobs as favors. He's turned down men who dated me for years because he thought they were soft. If he offered you something, it's because he watched you and decided you were worth the risk on your own merit, not because of me. You sure about that? I have never been more sure of anything about my father in my life. I believed her. Mostly. But some stubborn part of me, the part that had built a business out of nothing because he didn't trust handouts, kept turning the offer over looking for the catch. I met Richard Thursday morning in an office on the top floor of a building downtown, glass walls, a view that made my stomach flip a little when I looked out it too long. He didn't waste time on small talk. Here's the offer. He slid a folder across the desk. Salary, benefits, a budget for hiring 2 more men under you to start, room to grow that number as the properties demand it. You'd answer to me directly, not to a property management layer that doesn't know a busted boiler from a leaking roof. I looked at the numbers. They were good. Better than good, more than double what I brought home most years running solo, with none of the risk of chasing down clients who paid late or not at all. Can I ask you something, sir? Go ahead. Is this because of Sophie? Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me. Sophie told you to ask me that, or you thought of it yourself? Myself. She'd probably be annoyed if she knew I was asking. That got the same deep laugh out of him I'd heard at the gala. Good. That tells me something. He folded his hands on the desk. Son, I've watched a parade of men come through my daughter's life who wanted my company more than they wanted her. I know how to spot that. What I saw Saturday was a man who didn't know which fork to use and didn't care, who told my wife the truth about his income without flinching, who didn't take the bait when Preston Ward tried to bait him. That's not the profile of a man chasing a payday. That's the profile of a man I want managing my properties, because he'll tell me the truth about a leaking roof instead of covering it up to protect a contract. I sat with that a moment. And if I say yes, and things with Sophie don't go anywhere, does the job disappear? The job has nothing to do with my daughter. If you two never speak again after tonight, the offer stands exactly the same. He tapped the folder. I don't mix my business with sentiment, Ethan. That's how you keep a company alive for 40 years. I signed the folder that afternoon. The first few weeks were harder than I expected, not because the work itself was unfamiliar. I'd fixed enough busted pipes and cracked foundations to know my way around any of Richard's 11 buildings blindfolded, but because I was learning to manage men instead of just being one. I hired 2 guys, Marcus and a quiet kid named Tobias who reminded me of myself 10 years back, and I spent those first weeks figuring out how to give orders without sounding like I'd forgotten where I came from. Sophie and I saw each other more than either of us probably planned. She'd stop by a property while I was walking the halls checking on a repair, claiming she needed to see the tenant files, though we both knew the files could have waited. I started staying later than I needed to some evenings, telling myself it was because the paperwork piled up, when really it was because she usually swung by the office around 6 with coffee and questions about how the day went. You're smiling at spreadsheets now, she said one evening, leaning in my office doorway. That's new. I'm smiling because Marcus finally figured out the water pressure issue on 4th Street without me holding his hand through it. Sure. That's why. I looked up at her. What else would it be? She didn't answer right away, just crossed the room and sat on the edge of my desk, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to keep looking at her. You've been different since the job started. Steadier. Like you finally believe you deserve to be in a building like this instead of just fixing it. I still fix it. I just also manage the guys who fix it now. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I set my pen down. What did you mean? She held my eyes a long moment, and the office felt smaller than it had 30 seconds earlier. I meant that the man who showed up on my doorstep in a funeral suit is the same man sitting behind this desk now, and I like both versions of him a great deal. The air between us went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with paperwork. I thought about reaching for her hand right then, and I might have, if Preston Ward hadn't chosen that exact moment to knock on the open door. Sorry to interrupt. He didn't sound sorry at all. Sophie, your father's looking for you downstairs. Something about the 4th Street inspection. Sophie stood up slow, straightening her jacket, the moment between us folding itself away like it had never happened. I'll head down. She glanced back at me before she left. This isn't over. Preston lingered in the doorway after she left, arms crossed, looking around my office like he was pricing the furniture. Nice space. Richard's usually stingier with corner offices. I earned it. I'm sure you did. He smiled, the kind of smile that had a blade folded inside it. You know, I used to run these properties, back before Richard decided he wanted, and I quote, someone with real hands-on experience. Funny how a man fixes one sink and suddenly he's qualified to run an entire portfolio. I don't think it was the sink that got me the job. No, I imagine it was the daughter. His voice stayed pleasant, which made it worse. Careful, Ethan. Richard's generous when he's charmed. He's a different man entirely when he thinks somebody's played him. Is that a threat? It's a fact. He pushed off the doorframe. Sophie has a habit of falling fast and regretting it slower. Ask me how I know. He walked off before I could answer, and I sat there a long minute turning his words over, trying to decide how much of it was jealousy talking and how much of it was something I actually needed to worry about. The trouble started 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday, when I got a call from Marcus that the boiler in the 4th Street building, the same one we'd just repaired, had failed completely overnight, flooding the basement and knocking out heat to 11 units in the middle of a cold snap. I drove over before sunrise and found Marcus standing in ankle-deep water with a flashlight, looking sick. I don't get it, he said. We replaced the pressure valve 2 weeks ago. This shouldn't have happened. I crouched down and examined the busted unit myself, and something about the damage looked wrong the second I saw it, too clean, too specific, like somebody had loosened a fitting by hand rather than let it fail naturally. I didn't say anything to Marcus yet, but the thought sat heavy in my chest the whole drive to Richard's office that morning. Richard was not happy. I stood in front of his desk while he read the incident report Marcus had filed, his jaw tight. Tenants are furious. I've got 3 calling for rent reductions and 1 threatening legal action over property damage. He set the report down. Walk me through what happened. I don't think it failed on its own, sir. That got his full attention. Explain. The fitting we replaced 2 weeks ago was tampered with. I've seen enough natural failures to know the difference. Somebody loosened that connection by hand, recently, close to when it burst. Richard's face went very still. You're telling me someone sabotaged my building? I'm telling you what I saw. I can't prove who. But you have a guess. I hesitated, because saying it out loud felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I do. Say it. Preston Ward came by my office 2 weeks ago. Told me he used to manage these properties before you brought me on. He wasn't happy about the change. I met Richard's eyes. I'm not accusing him without proof. I'm telling you what I know and what I suspect, and letting you decide what to do with it. Richard sat back in his chair, quiet for a long moment. Get me the maintenance access logs for the building going back 3 weeks. Every entry, every keycard swipe. It took 2 days to pull it all together, and when Marcus and I finally laid the logs out on Richard's desk, there it was, plain as anything. A keycard swipe at 4th Street at 11 at night, 4 days before the failure, logged under an old maintenance account nobody had deactivated when Preston left his position. Preston's account. Richard stared at the log a long time without saying anything. Then he picked up his phone. Get Preston Ward in here. Now. Preston walked in 20 minutes later, still wearing that easy, confident smile, right up until Richard turned the laptop screen toward him and pointed at the access log. Care to explain this? Preston's smile faltered, just slightly, just enough that I saw it. That account should have been deactivated months ago. I have no idea what that log means. It means somebody used your old credentials to access a building you have no current business reason to enter, 4 days before a boiler failure that could have seriously hurt one of my tenants. Richard's voice was flat, controlled, and somehow that made it more frightening than shouting would have. I built this company on trust, Preston. I have known your family for 20 years. And you decided the way to handle losing a job you were never that good at in the first place was to sabotage a building full of families in the middle of winter. You can't prove I was the one who. I don't need a courtroom to know what I'm looking at. Richard stood up. You're done. Not just with this company. I'll be making calls today, and I promise you, Every door in this city that matters to you is about to get very hard to open. Preston's eyes flicked to me, and whatever calm he'd been holding onto cracked open into something uglier. This is because of him. Because Richard's playing house with his daughter's charity project. That's enough, Richard said, quiet and final. Preston looked at me a long moment, and I watched every bit of his composure fall away until there was nothing left but a man who'd gotten caught. Enjoy it while it lasts, Ethan. Men like you don't last in rooms like this. Maybe not, I said. But I'll last longer than a man who tampers with a boiler out of spite. He left without another word, and the office was quiet a long time after the door shut behind him. Richard exhaled slowly and sat back down. I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm not sorry it's over. He looked at me, something like respect settling into his face. You could have kept your suspicion to yourself. Let it stay a maintenance mystery. Instead, you brought me the truth even though it put you in a difficult position. You hired me to tell you the truth about broken things, sir. Didn't seem right to make an exception. Richard almost smiled at that. No. It wouldn't have. Sophie found me on the loading dock behind the 4th Street building that evening, where I'd gone to get some air after a day that felt like it had lasted a year. She climbed up to sit beside me on the concrete edge without asking, the cold seeping through both our jackets. My father told me what happened. I figured he would. He also told me what Preston said to you. About you not lasting in rooms like this. I looked out at the parking lot instead of at her. Maybe he's not wrong. He's completely wrong, and I think you know it. She bumped her shoulder against mine. You caught him in sabotaging my father's building because you noticed a detail nobody else would have thought to check. You handled him with more grace than I would have managed. That's not a man who doesn't belong in the room, Ethan. That's a man who makes the room better just by being in it. I turned to look at her then, really look at her, the porch light behind the loading dock catching the side of her face. Can I tell you something I haven't said yet? Please. I didn't take your father's job because I wanted it. I took it because saying no felt like proving Preston right before he even opened his mouth, like admitting I didn't belong. But somewhere in the last few weeks, it stopped being about proving anything. I took a breath. It became about you. Showing up here every evening. Finding reasons to stay later than the paperwork needs. None of that's about the job. Sophie was quiet a moment, her eyes bright in the dim light. I've been doing the same thing. Finding reasons. Telling myself it was about the tenant files. Was it ever about the tenant files? Not once. I reached over and took her hand, and this time nobody interrupted us. Sophie Bennett, I fixed your sink, I wore a suit that smelled like a closet, and somewhere between the balcony at that gala and this loading dock, I fell for you completely. I don't know the right way to say that to a woman whose family owns 11 buildings and probably a few things I haven't heard about yet, but I'm not going to pretend it isn't true just because it sounds complicated. She laughed, soft and a little wet, and leaned her forehead against my shoulder. It's only complicated if we let it be. I've spent my whole life around men who wanted something from this family. You wanted my honest opinion on grout sealant. That's the least complicated thing that's ever happened to me. Romantic. I thought so. I kissed her there on the loading dock with the cold air biting at both our jackets, and it felt nothing like the calculated, careful version of romance I'd watched play out in that ballroom weeks earlier. It felt like something neither of us had planned and both of us had wanted since long before either of us admitted it out loud. The months that followed were not some smooth, easy climb. Richard made it clear early on that he expected me to earn every inch of my position, gala date or not, and I did, working longer hours than I ever had running my own van, learning the parts of the business that had nothing to do with wrenches and everything to do with budgets and contracts and difficult conversations with tenants who didn't want to hear that a repair would take another week. Sophie and I dated quietly at first, then not so quietly, and word got around the company fast the way it always does, but nobody dared say much out loud after watching what happened to Preston. Sophie's mother came around slower than her father had, taking a full season before she stopped asking pointed questions about my income at every family dinner, but even she softened eventually, especially after I fixed her garden fountain without being asked and refused to take a dime for it. Somewhere around the 6-month mark, Sophie's mother finally invited me to a proper family dinner instead of the polite, guarded lunches she'd been arranging as tests I didn't know I was taking. I showed up in the good suit this time, not the funeral one, and found the whole family gathered around a table set with more silverware than I owned in my entire kitchen. Sophie squeezed my knee under the table the whole first course, like she expected her mother to start interrogating me between the soup and the salad. She did, of course. Margaret Bennett had never once let an opportunity slide. "Ethan," she said, setting down her spoon with the precision of a woman who'd been rehearsing the question. "Sophie tells me you turned down a transfer to a much larger firm last month. One with a corner office and a company car, I understand." "Yes, ma'am." "Turned it down the same day they offered it. Why on earth would you do that?" "Because the offer came from a man who wanted my name on his letterhead more than he wanted my work. I've spent enough of my life doing jobs that mattered to me. Didn't feel like starting over just to sit behind a bigger desk for somebody who'd never once asked how the work actually gets done." Margaret studied me a long moment, the way her husband had studied me the very first night, like she was deciding something important. "That's the same answer Richard gave me 40 years ago, when a competitor tried to buy him out before the company had even found its footing." "I didn't know that." "No," she said, and for the first time all evening, something in her face actually softened. "But it seems you didn't need to." After that dinner, things changed between us in small, steady ways. She started calling me by name instead of introducing me to her friends as Sophie's young man, which had always carried an edge I hadn't been able to name until it disappeared. She asked my opinion on the garden fountain before I'd even offered to look at it, and when I fixed it for free, she didn't argue, just handed me a slice of pie and told me to sit down and eat it before it got cold, the same way my own mother used to. Work kept moving just as fast. Marcus and Tobias brought 2 more guys onto the crew that spring, and I found myself teaching them the same things I'd once had to learn the hard way: how to read a tenant's frustration before it turned into a lawsuit, how to tell Richard bad news without dressing it up, how to walk into a room full of people who didn't expect much from a man with calluses on his hands and leave that room having earned their respect anyway. Some evenings I'd catch myself standing in the stairwell of one of the buildings, looking down 11 flights at a portfolio I'd helped turn around from the ground up, and think about how strange it was that all of it had started with one busted garbage disposal and a woman standing on my porch in a dress that cost more than my truck. A year after that first knock on my door, Richard called me into his office again, and for one uneasy second I thought I was about to relive the Preston conversation from the other side of the desk. Instead, he slid a different folder across to me. "I'm restructuring the property division. I want you running all of it, not just the 11 buildings. Full portfolio, seat on the operations committee, and yes, before you ask, this has nothing to do with my daughter and everything to do with the fact that you've turned my most troublesome division into my most profitable one in 12 months. I looked at the numbers, and then at him. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, the way you did the first time, except this time don't wait 4 days to think about it." I laughed, and signed the folder right there. That evening, I picked Sophie up from her apartment, and instead of telling her about the promotion right away, I drove us both to the loading dock behind 4th Street, the same cold concrete edge where we'd first admitted the truth to each other. She looked around, confused, until I got down on one knee with a ring I'd been carrying around in my jacket pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and realized somewhere in the last mile that there was no better moment than the exact spot where this whole thing had actually started. "Ethan, what are you?" "You asked me to be your date for one night," I said. "Best decision either of us ever made without meaning to. Your father offered me a job I almost turned down out of pride, and that turned into the best work I've ever done. And somewhere between a funeral suit and a busted boiler, I fell in love with a woman who never once made me feel small for showing up with grease under my fingernails." I opened the box. "Marry me, Sophie. Let's make the complicated thing simple." She was crying before I finished the sentence, laughing through it the way she did everything, and she said yes before I even got all the way through asking, which she still teases me about to this day, claiming I never actually finished the question. We got married the following spring in her parents' backyard, small, nothing like the gala that started it all, just family and the 2 guys from my crew standing up as groomsmen, both of them looking deeply uncomfortable in rented suits. Richard gave a toast that made half the yard laugh and the other half cry, ending with a line I've never forgotten. He said the best deal he ever made in 40 years of business was letting a stranger who fixed a sink walk into his daughter's life, because some repairs matter more than the ones you can bill for. Preston, as far as I know, never did find work in this city again. I try not to think about him much these days. There's not a lot of room left in my head for a man who tried to freeze out 11 families over wounded pride, not when there's a wife across the table who still argues with me about which fork to use, just to watch me squirm. People ask us sometimes how we met, and Sophie always tells it the same way. She says she asked a stranger to save her from one uncomfortable night, and instead he ended up rebuilding her whole life, one broken thing at a time. I just tell them I was minding my own business fixing a garbage disposal when the best thing that ever happened to me knocked on my door in a green dress and asked if I owned a suit. So here's what I want to know from you. Would you have said yes to a request that's strange, showing up as somebody's date with zero warning and even less explanation? And has a small, ordinary kindness you almost didn't bother with ever ended up changing your entire life the way that one favor changed mine? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this one hit you the way it hit me writing it, leave a like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.